Hello, everyone. Happy to see your beautiful faces. Thank you for being with us today. I think you all know me, but I'm Anna. I'm joining my Solvable colleagues, Adam and Anthony, today. We are part of Solvable, so we design and facilitate spaces like this for organizations asking, why aren't solutions solving? And organizations that are seeking to transition from current realities to future possibilities. And with a short intro, I will pass over to you, Adam, to get us started with what we'll be doing today.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Wanted to first start by introducing Alison and welcoming her into the space. I've been following Alison for, and I don't know, it feels like maybe 5 years or more in her work. You've greatly influenced a lot of my thinking and provocations that have asked me to question things from a different angle than necessarily others have brought in. So it's an honor to get to have this space with you. And would you mind briefly introducing yourself and saying hello?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I don't think I know anyone else on the line personally, so it's wonderful to meet you. My name's Alison Taylor. I am a clinical professor, which is like a professor of practice, doesn't mean I'm a medical doctor, at NYU Stern School of Business. But I am not a career academic. I spent 12 years investigating corruption. I spent 5 years in sustainability consulting. I've worked for Transparency International. I worked for Jonathan Haidt, who you probably have heard of, author of The Anxious Generation. I ran a think tank for him focused on business ethics, and I've been a full-time teacher for coming up for 3 years. I'm also the author of a book called Higher Ground, which tries to somewhat naively perhaps lay out what it even means for a business to do the right thing in a turbulent world today. And I have a lot of other kind of advisory gigs and side gigs and that kind of thing, and a lot of opinions, and I am delighted to be here.
Thank you. We're delighted that you're here. And so thank you guys for supporting Solvable. My name is Anthony. And sometimes I tend to break rules, but not today, not yet. This series, the New Works Organizational Mazes series, our objective is to shine light into the dark corners of organizational change with brilliant writers like Alison. I really enjoyed reading Higher Ground. And to host what we call Dojo Maze sessions that extend these ideas that Alison and like Todd bring forth into adaptive practice. Our intention is to tap into our collective genius, investigating the unspoken dynamics, uncomfortable truths, and hidden compliance pressures that form our messy organizational realities. Additionally, the Maze Dojos will be, almost like a intentional space to not only apply the learnings, but to kind of reclaim agency, build skills, and enhance leadership capacities. The series runs until June 2026. And like I said before, we're very thankful and appreciative that you're sharing your time and talents and resources with us. Thanks.
Yeah, so this is the second author session we are having, and we feel that this larger theme of ethics in business is really important as part of organizational mazes, because too often ethics get kind of reduced to risk management, reputational shielding, and turn these value-driven aims into performative and often quite ineffective interventions. And incentives and power dynamics can also bend good intentions, and the terrain is very complex to navigate. So that's why we think learning from and with Alison today can help us sharpen a bit a clearer standard for what it means and how to enact an ethical business. Adam? over to you.
Thank you. So the way this session will work for those of you that weren't in our first session with Todd is we are going to have a couple of opening questions that we're going to share with everybody, and we're going to use Mentimeter to kind of surface the field with you and your perspectives, particularly around corporations. So we'll spend a few minutes doing that, and then I will go into dialogue with Alison, and this is unscripted. It's scripted for me in the sense of we as a team talked about what questions we wanted to ask you, Alison, but Alison she did not want to know the questions we were going to ask. So it will be approximately 20 to 30 minutes of a kind of flow dialogue. We'll see how long that lasts. And then we will open that up into dialogue with you to step in. And we will do that directly through a virtual fishbowl format, which we'll explain more later. And then we will have a close. This is a 90-minute session. I know a few of you may have to leave at the top of the hour. That's okay. We are going to record the session up until the fishbowl. For sensitivity, we are not recording the fishbowl so that you can feel free to share things about your own experiences around organizational life that are not going to be put up on YouTube. So we will we'll get started now with Mentimeter. One more person's coming in. So I will share my screen, Anna, if you want to. Let's see. Here we go.
Thank you, Adam.
Can everybody see that?
Yes, I'm seeing. Okay, so before we dive into the conversation with Alison, we wanted to get a kind of quick sense of the room. So you can share your thoughts on Mentimeter by either scanning the QR code on the screen or entering menti.com and entering the code that is there, the numbers. We are going to go through some quick round of questions, and it's not to overthink, it's just to surface some immediate reactions, thoughts and feelings that come to you when you hear this question. Just giving you some time to be able to log in there.
Is there anybody else that needs time to get onto Mentimeter? Is everybody on? Okay, I can't post the instructions on it because I'm sharing my screen, but if you want to drop it into the chat.
Yeah, sure. Let me just, I think the code still appears on the screen, but
yeah, it'll stay up there. That's true. Let's just go.
Okay, I also put it in the chat there. Okay, so the first question is, what is the value of corporations to society? Feel free to input. This is an open text, so you can input there and we will see the answers here. Employer. Create jobs. Provide services and ideally generators of solutions to shared needs. So you're already tapping a bit more into the ethics, I think. Producer of goods and services and innovation. A lot of people mentioning services and products. Meet market needs. Scaling solution, employment, procurement, adding value, and solving problems. So we are already seeing a lot of different things that we expect corporations meet. Not convinced. Provide products and services for essential and non-essential, balance the economy, not sure. Creators are of urgency, interesting. Scale to do big things and depends on governance structure. Yeah, this is great. A lot of initial thoughts coming in. I think we are okay to go to the second one, Anna. Okay, are corporations capable of being ethical? What are your initial immediate thoughts? Absolutely. Depends on incentives. Yes, no way. A lot of different mixed feelings here. Can be, not guaranteed. Depends on whose needs, expectations they are built to meet. Yes, this is a very important one. Yes, but not all, not in current form. Interesting perspective. Not convinced, capable, yes. Do they? Depends. If they serve local communities, yes, but unlikely in the absence of reinforcing structures, incentives. Yeah, this is great. And I imagine Alison will also touch on that today, since her book covers a lot of the things that are already being surfaced. People mentioning being unclear, being tried in a number of ways, always boils down to whether the people engaged in and with the corporation have the will and the stamina to continue that, right? Load-bearing assumption. Yeah, a lot of different emotions there. Okay, the last one. Do you feel that corporations care about people like you? Why or why not? As a consumer, yes. Yes, to the extent useful to them. No way, they care about money and proximity to people that makes them money. Some do. They do care about their customers. A lot of saying about this customer, if a customer, yes, because then it is something that benefits them. They are required to create profit. That is a tangential question. Not me as a person, but me as a consumer. Only if you have a return. Corporation as an externalizing machine. So care is the wrong verb. Really interesting. Yes, they do because the value if the company is the people. So a lot of interesting perspectives coming in already. And this is a very complex terrain to navigate, as you can see, but the very mixed thoughts, feeling, responses. But I think this sets us up already for a great starting point for the conversation with Alison. So I will pass over to you, Adam, and we will share the results of this Mentimeter with you after the session as well.
Super interesting.
Yeah, thank you everybody for adding your thoughts. Part of the reason we wanted to also do the Mentimeter is just to bring some of your thinking into this conversation early to help frame the way that Alison and I might navigate into this conversation. So I am going to spotlight you now, and I'll spotlight myself too to be in dialogue with you. So Alison, you're welcome to also respond to anything that was coming up for you. And in the process of
I mean, I'd just say a couple of things. I think the responses reflect the ambivalence that we feel about these questions. And I think there is profound ambivalence. I think, you know, when I tell people I work on corporate ethics and responsibility, they generally go, oh, well, they'll need all the help they can get, or isn't that an oxymoron, or something like that. So I think this is a very common frame. The other thing I think is sort of super interesting is on the last question, do corporations care about people? Well, corporations, we personify corporations in interesting things, in interesting ways, right? Corporations don't care about anything. Corporations are systems. People care about things. So many, I think, really interesting comments about that and the kind of incentives and structures that might drive or draw away from people behaving ethically, which I think most people want to do. And you tend to get the feeling when you talk to actual people working in businesses that they feel constrained by the system in some way.
Yes, and some Monica noted the ambivalence is a good word, and I'm really glad that you used it as well. And part of what I would like to talk about is what do we do with our ambivalence, both as employees as well as people that are part of a social compact with corporations in
Yeah.
sharing a world. So maybe we'll begin with a little bit of your diagnosis. I'm always interested in how you see things, and particularly how your thinking evolves and how you see the system. So, could you start with spending a couple of minutes by describing the kind of state of corporate solutions as you see them in 2025? What's the state of the corporation? You start the book very much centering around this kind of call for stakeholder capitalism and the move around Business Roundtable and others in 2019. So we're 6 years on to that. What's the state of corporate solutions as you see them in 2025?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the period in which I wrote Higher Ground was a period where we were starting to see the backlash against these kind of, I would say this peak of stakeholder capitalism was 2019, 2020. That was characterized by a lot of verbal commitments, a lot of CEO activism, a lot of promises that we'd move to a new era and we'd let go of Milton Friedman and so on. And I was making that case myself. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, it looks pretty naive. And for everyone on the line, I'm based in New York. So it is hard, even though I'm not an American, it's hard for me not to take a US-centric view of this question. I think what we're seeing from American corporations right now is a giant kind of shift of the pendulum back the other way. There is obviously a lot of fear about retaliation. The current government behaves like a bit of a gangster. We've got armies of lawyers kind of ensuring that corporations don't say or do anything that would get legally attacked. But I think all of this has come at the expense of credibility. I think we are, the country is divided, the world is divided. I spend a lot of time in the classroom with young people who I think still do want inclusive, responsible businesses that do something about their environmental and social challenges. So I suppose the very short way of putting it and where we are in 2025 is corporations are having a credibility crisis and they don't know how to move forward. And part of that is their own short-term, fearful, legalistic thinking. But I think it also reflects a wider problem in the landscape, which is that we tend to frame responsibility and ethics in either a minimalist or a maximalist way. So either we're going back to Milton Friedman and focusing on shareholder value and go woke, go broke, and stick to your knitting and stop trying to save the world. But then on the other side, from the sustainability and ethics community of whom I am a member, there is a tendency, I think, to suggest that corporations should take on and solve an enormous range of problems. I don't think there is a consensus on how far business should go. And something that is really disturbing me at the moment is that I'm seeing a lot of activists and progressives and well-meaning people spending more time attacking the companies that are already doing their best, that are already progressive. And I would use as one example Target, given its flip-flopping on DEI. And so we're sort of seeing the left eating its own to a degree to which I think is kind of problematic and unfocused. So hopefully I've said enough provocative things there. We can carry on the conversation.
It's great. And I think I'm going to ask for your permission to kind of steer us into the company. You take multiple lenses about kind of the ways in which we might engage with a corporation. There's an externalization, so you're outside of the organization, or you could be internal as a shareholder, you could be internal as an employee. I'd like to take us into the inner part of how this actually functions per our organizational mazes focus. And I'm particularly interested in this notion of like this quick turn that you're describing around the corporation in this 180 turn. What we know about culture, organizational culture, is organizational culture moves slowly. It moves
Yes.
really, really slowly. So from the outside of the from the outside, we might see, something that is a major, major shift, say, for instance, the target one you're mentioning around DEI. Internally, to the culture of the organization, it doesn't move. While a policy might change, or external communications, as you identified in the book, might change, the culture inside with the people that are actually making things possible, I don't believe can change nearly at the velocity of Marcom or other things in the external landscape. So I'm curious about how you see the kind of crisis of credibility manifesting internally with the employees and leaders, and how that's affecting corporate culture as you're experiencing.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think it's quite difficult with the best will in the world to understand, and there's a much commentary either way, quite difficult to understand whether what we have is a situation where companies are green hushing and still doing everything that they were doing before and just calling it something else, which plenty of people are arguing, versus the degree to which there is some kind of meaningful effort to dial back what's going on. And if we take a company like Meta, I think we've seen Mark Zuckerberg create a kind of, try to create a new atmosphere. And so I would think in a company like that, this is very, very meaningful. I think the other thing we can miss here is that external signaling does have an impact on the internal culture. So we can try and separate the two, but there is some sort of a feedback loop. I think, inside companies right now, there's obviously a sense of destabilization over AI. There are a lot of job losses. There's a lot of fear, but I think we do also have, among young employees, a very different view of what the corporation should and shouldn't be. And one of the big themes in the book is the willingness of young people to weaponize damaging internal information in the public domain, to get together on Slack and coordinate and message. For example, there was an open letter from Amazon employees kind of criticizing Bezos a few years ago. And if you look at a lot of media reporting, you can see that a lot of the insights are coming from employees who are dissatisfied and who are trying to weaponize reputational risk. So I would agree with you that culture and messaging are not the same thing, but I'm also seeing in a very real sense companies that really have been on the front foot on these issues really losing direction. And so I think the backlash is proving rather effective in terms of the companies that were leaders and really trying to do the right thing. And so that is my big concern at the moment, that we stop attacking the companies that are doing their absolute best. And then two, and even more importantly, that we're providing some kind of practical path forward, because I do feel like CEOs at the moment are rabbits in the headlights. So I think it's a really complicated story. I could make the argument that there's more rigor around the efforts that remain, that there's more seriousness around the efforts that remain, but the political context is really scary. And then, internationally, I think corporations really struggling to set and understand their values and commitments, because of course the US is not the only actor, and we have many other parts of the world moving in a very different direction. So there's a sort of set of really profound dilemmas. And these are particularly sharp dilemmas because I think many CEOs I talk to and come across don't even realize what the dilemma is. So it's seen as a sort of, we crouch and we don't think about, we manage our reputational risk and we get the lawyers and we delete DEI from our website. But I don't see, there are some exceptions and they're all European. I don't see a lot of kind of thinking about what does this look like in this new world where we don't have geopolitical alignment, where the UN is dysfunctional, where we don't have agreement on what a corporation should and shouldn't be doing. And so even understanding that problem, I think would be really helpful from today's leaders.
Thank you. So one of the things I think I expressed to you, and certainly did on LinkedIn posts as well, that I really appreciated about your style of writing in Higher Ground and in other spaces as well, is you kind of trouble the binaries. You don't take the normal positions or set things up as binary decisions. And in the book, you specifically kind of it's very hard to pinpoint exactly what you are recommending. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not suggesting that it's a bad thing, but I'm going to use this space to ask you point blank, what exactly are you calling on corporations, their leaders, and employees to do?
I mean, you're right. When I was doing it in the peer review section of writing my book, one of the reviewers commented, she seems to be against sustainability and against shareholder value, and I don't understand what she's trying. And I was like, yeah, that's the point, So I think the one-word answer is focus. And so there has been a tendency, and this is probably too much wonky sustainability chat for this group of people, there's been a tendency to tick the box on 40 things, to use ethics as a form of stealth PR, to talk about all the wonderful things we're doing, to hope if we disclose on all these ESG metrics, we'll somehow be rewarded by consumers and shareholders. And none of that has really got to the root of the problem. This has led to the most kind of obvious example is Unilever, going out there really implicitly promising to solve an enormous range of environmental and social problems which are highly intractable. That, I think, has partly caused the credibility crisis, has fueled the backlash. And we need to, as a responsible business, ethics, culture, community, to provide more practical thinking on how we can find a path, through the mire. So if I'm talking about goals and commitments, I would say focus on where you have legitimacy, focus on where you have leverage. To bring the conversation more to the internal culture level, I think you see a version of this as well. We've got a kind of anachronistic, historic view of leadership that you set strategy, you design incentives, you cascade down your initiatives, you bark orders from the top, and that's what it means to be a leader. You never say, I don't know. You project confidence, you project control. And the backlash against that was then, everyone should bring their whole selves to work. Every employee should be able to work somewhere aligned with their values. We should be utterly flexible. We need to be specialists in mental health. We need to kind of accommodate people. We need to open up every decision to a consensus vote. And I would say the same thing there. Like, I don't think either of those models of leadership is very effective. And the companies that have, in good faith, I think, tried to follow that more kind of collaborative bottom-up leadership model have very often found themselves more mired in internal conflict than other people. I mean, I think you hear this particularly about the Middle East, but not exclusively about the Middle East. And so there is some line to be drawn there about kind of setting direction and projecting confidence, but also listening and taking on, opinions and keeping people with you. And again, I see quite a binary conversation there about what leadership really looks like. So whether it's at the level of the role of business in society and can that be positive, or whether it's a level of kind of what are we doing to motivate and engage our employees, I think everyone is trapped between these minimalist and maximalist views. And I think we need to have and there's been a view for many years, the worst place to be is in the middle with everybody yelling at you. But I think we need to provide a way forward that seems more practical and can be implemented and is sensible, and that the average leader of today can understand. Though between us, I'm also waiting for the generational leadership shift. Saw a bit of that overnight politically.
Yeah, one of the things that we've gone back and forth about on LinkedIn a few times was the reaction was in essence, like what I saw as a reaction to this kind of focus, which is, if we think about what you're saying, which is there's this kind of schizophrenic focus that's happening, or we've seen this major turn. So let's say teams are hired, they have initiatives that are underway, they're doing an incredible job of focusing on impact. The very impact that you say they have high leverage on, they're situated around harms. And then, a year later, 2 years later, there's a large turn like we've experienced now, as you said, a 180 turn, a backlash, and all of a sudden the focus has really shifted and the modalities have shifted, but the ways in which the thing that you were hired for, and therefore the thing that you were getting really good at, has actually completely changed on you. And so the title of your role was one that was oriented towards a focus that was maybe 2 years ago. And in fact, you were hired for that thing because you were really good at it. And now the organization has changed. They've changed the initiative. So this gap that happens in the internal space around change making and the efficacy of people to have focus on the very things that an organization says are core to our impact on the world. Kind of needs a duration. And so what is there to, and so part of what we see is you have people that leave the organization, you have whistleblowers, et cetera, who fall into these camps that are kind of, they have to exit out of this very system because of this shift in focus. So I'm curious in this time, if we think about the thousands and thousands of employees, especially at multinational corporations that are hired around certain intentions and become really good at focusing on certain aspects of impact. What are the implications, I guess, on the workplace culture as the focus shifts? And what happens to these very initiatives that maybe 2-3 years ago were very much part of an organizational identity in how we actually stay at work?
I mean, I think it's a really good and complicated question. I think it depends a little bit on the initiative. So there was a piece recently in Bloomberg, for example, sort of talking about DEI specialists and how no skill sets become so obsolete so quickly. And that's a direct outcome of DEI being oversold and treated in this legalistic tick box. Let's hire someone and not give them much authority and expect them to tackle systemic racism in a year. So, that there's that kind of over-promising has gone away doesn't mean we still don't need to focus on fairness and inclusion, which people care deeply about. Or you could say, there's been backtracking on sustainability goals, but then I think it's up to the internal person to kind of pivot and show how there is a way forward where the company can maintain credibility and get something done. So I think rather than us reacting, we've got to kind of seize the conversation. I actually have an article coming out on this in the next few weeks. I think the other thing is many responsible business people feel somewhat trapped again between these binary frames are a real theme here. So are they really activists at heart that don't trust business and so are going to be campaigners? They're the voice of society. They're trying to move corporations in a direction that the corporation finds uncomfortable. That can be dangerous and undermine your credibility. Or equally, are you just a kind of obedient corporate drone that's kind of out there making a very glib business case and doing whatever the CFO tells you? And I think everybody I know that works in the ethics, sustainability, or culture space kind of struggles between that, how much am I trying to change the system from within? How much can I feel I'm really effective? Where do I compromise? Where do I, there's always a lot of guidance about talk the language of business and meet people where they are. But at what point are you then compromising your kind of fundamental values? So the paper I'm about to write about has a really interesting frame about how you can kind of balance those two pressures and maintain your credibility. But I think that is the problem. I think back to ambivalence, I feel ambivalent about the private sector. I feel ambivalent about corporations. So how I show up and how I provide advice when I'm pretty angry about a lot of things that are going on, I think that's a real challenge for me, and I suspect everybody on this call.
I'm excited to read the article. Can you give us a little bit of a preview, I guess, about it? Because it specifically relates to what we were talking to Todd Kashdan about around the art of insubordination in the first session. And I'm curious, what are you recommending, or what are you feeling about the role of insubordination in these moments inside of organizations?
I mean, I think I love Todd Kashdan. I think insubordination is wonderful, but you have to be targeted and realistic. So I don't know that yelling at oil companies or yelling at banks for financing oil companies is really going to achieve very much. but you might be able to do something very significant about another specific topic that a corporation can take on. So I think, again, it's a kind of lack of focus. I think insubordination can be very, very effective, but you've got to choose your path and you've got to pick your battles, and you've got to negotiate carefully and be clear about what you were trying to achieve. If people don't know the work of Megan Reitz, that's R-E-I-T-Z, she is a really, really, really wonderful writer on kind of this speaking up and employee voice and psychological safety and how you actually drive change. And she's got this taxonomy of responses to activism where, you know, these kind of various leaders, you know, some of them are like, what activism? Some of them are really being performative and some of them really mean it. And so also I think how you target your activism will depend a lot on the mindset and the thinking of the senior leadership team. So how direct and confrontational you are really will depend a lot on the leader that you are already engaging with.
Thank you. I'm anxious to get to bring other people into the conversation, but I see that it's just kind of laying the foundation in a bunch of different aspects of the book, so that we can then go into depth around some of the pieces that people really want to talk about. So hopefully it's not too scattered. I appreciate you coming back to the focus point. So one of the pieces that I wanted to make sure to get out in this space, especially given your background around compliance, is some of your thinking in the book about really why is it so difficult to get everyone in a company not to break the law?
I mean, it is difficult. Part of it is, I think a lot of companies or their legal teams or their risk teams are making a very calculated decision to break the law, because the penalties, and I'm thinking particularly of big tech, the penalties are just not big enough to make it worthwhile to comply with the law. Probably the even bigger issue is the kind of companies putting their finger on the scale in the regulatory design to ensure that it acts in their favor. And if we didn't have that kind of corruption, I think a lot of other problems would go away. I read thousands of student ethics papers every year, and I think the biggest reason I see why corporations and employees within them break the law is that there is a do as I say, not as I do attitude from leadership. There is a sense that the rules only apply to you and they don't apply to me. And nothing degrades organizational culture faster. This creates a sense of unfairness. This encourages employees to commit fraud. There is not a sense that, and I feel like there is a need for much, much more beyond rules and compliance. But if you don't enforce the rules and compliance fairly, if there's not credible punishment for wrongdoing, then anything else you're going to do in terms of sustainability or culture or values or change just rests on really, really shaky foundations.
Thank you. All right, let's open the space up. So the way that this will work, for those of you that haven't done this with us before, is we're going to create what you may have done in an in-person environment before, which is called a fishbowl. And we're going to do this in a virtual space. So the way that this works is we would like to invite 3 other people to come into dialogue with Alison. And so there will be 4 spots. Imagine that we were in a room. These are the 4 chairs that sit in the center. And then you have a periphery of a circle that is outside of those 4 seats. You will be sitting as witness in those outer seats. So in the center, we will have the 4 chairs. I will use the spotlight function to set up that inner circle. And the way that I invite you to do this to make it easier, at least for me to facilitate your coming and going, is if you want to come in the circle, you can use the raise hand function. And if you haven't done that before, if you go in the bottom toolbar in Zoom under React, there's an option to raise your hand. That'll signal that you want to come in. And if you also are in the circle and you would like to come out, you can use the raise your hand function. So this is intended to create a space for greater dialogue. please know that unlike a traditional kind of question and answer, you don't need to like drop in your question and then escape the circle. The goal is for you to like stay in dialogue both with Alison as well as a few other people in the space. So I am going to, first of all, stop the recording now. If I can expand my toolbar.